And so I share this with you because I want you to see the complexity at the same time that how all of these things are embedded naturally through this remarkable biological masterpiece of how cooing and the stages of babbling are really, really helpful to get your child to his 2-word utterance at 2 and full-fledged conversation at 3.
Hello, and welcome to Talking Toddlers, where I share more than just tips and tricks on how to reduce tantrums or build your toddler's vocabulary. We're going to cover all of that, but here, our goal is to develop clarity, because in this modern world, it's truly overwhelming. This podcast is about empowering moms to know the difference between fact and fiction, to never give up, to tap into everyday activities so your child stays on track. He's not falling behind, he's thriving through your guidance. We know that true learning starts at home, so let's get started.
Before we jump into this week's episode, which is one of my favorite topics to share, I wanted to explain that it kind of ran long, over 2 hours actually. So I decided to break it up into 2 parts. One major goal for this podcast, Talking Toddlers, is to provide true value. I know my deep dives can't be found anywhere else, and I want to give you meaningful insights, specific steps, and really help you move that needle. I know you'll enjoy this first part of this extended episode, Help Your Toddler Learn to Talk by Strengthening Babbling Skills. Well, hello there, and today we're going to delve into the topic that might sound a little simple to you at first, but trust me, it holds profound significance in your baby's overall development. And that milestone is babbling. So babbling isn't just this adorable gibberish that we might, think of. It's a crucial milestone that plays a pivotal role in your baby's cognitive and linguistic development. If you've been listening to me for a while, you'll understand that when I mention cognition or cognitive skills, it's not the concept of intellect or IQ. It really is the mental action or the process of acquiring knowledge and understanding of your immediate world. And our babies do this through experience. They build their thought capacity, their cognition of understanding through their senses as they interface or engage with their immediate environment. And that's primarily you at this early stage. Linguistics is perhaps a more familiar term where we're looking at language and language learning, that acquisition. And there are 4 primary areas that I, as a speech-language developmental specialist, really look at. And I talk about different aspects of these, but the first one is phonology. So those are the speech sounds, and that's the physical part of talking. And then there's morphology, which is the formation of the words. How do we put those sounds, the phonology, together to form words? And then the third one is syntax, which is the formation of our sentences. And yes, the sentences structure, the syntax differ from language to language. How do we form sentences? By putting those strings of words together. And then the last section would be semantics, which is the meaning of the words and the meaning of the sentences. So those 4 primary linguistic components. In this episode, we'll first uncover the science behind why babbling's so important. I'm a science geek. That's where I come from. There's always a reason that babies, toddlers, children, human beings in general will do things and better courses to take. Or I guess a better way to say that is that there are outside influences that are healthier than not, right? And so we'll walk through the stages of what babbling looks like, and then you can use that as a gauge to look at, where is my baby now? And how do I support either getting back on track or honing those ages and stages so that he or she can really absorb the most out of your daily life. And we do this, I think, best through intentional parenting. And if you've heard my last few episodes in 2024, for me, it's about being intentional. And I'm really diving deep into that. As a business person, a clinician, and a parent coach, I want to be more intentional for you. And I also want to be more intentional for my whole life, my family, my marriage, my friendships. But how do we help each other in our different roles? And so intentional parenting for me is more of being mindful of your current stage and where you are in this motherhood and where your children are in this growth and development. And how can we together create environments, your home environment that's conducive to learning, that gives them the best fighting chance to be the best version of themselves, right? And then based on this information, both science and then personal and professional experience, what's appropriate or most helpful at any stage. So today we're just going to zone in on babbling because I think a critical milestone that is often overlooked, because I don't think pediatricians, daycare providers, even occupational therapists or healthcare providers in general, including my field, really understand or have embraced this chunk of time between 6 months and 12 months, give or take, as so pivotal as a stepping stone into enhancing speech and language skills. Here I'm always striving to build a healthy connection and relationship, to build curiosity with your child or for your child, and then stretch those abilities, right? That 80-20 rule. 80% is reinforcement and honing those skills and building automaticity, mastery, and that 20% of let's stretch. Let's try something different. Let's work it out. So then tomorrow or next week, we'll see that developmental growth, that spurt. So babbling, I think, glossed over marker that is often on a history form, but never really analyzed for what it truly is. So I want you to keep in mind that although I'm focusing in on the ideal time of babbling, 6 months, 12 months, all the way up to 18 months, if you do have an older toddler right now, an 18-month-old or 24-month-old, it's really important to hear what these ages and stages are and hear some of the strategies to support these, because you want to look back really honestly and say, did we gloss over this? Was this a stage that we kind of just acknowledged and then skipped? And I equate it often with quote unquote skipping crawling. Oh, my baby just started walking and didn't really crawl. Through my 35 years of practice, I think both babbling and crawling are critical to building those blocks that really solidify, that builds that foundation for all learning that comes above it. And it's neurologically based. It's biologically driven. It's part of what builds our networks that help us to these higher order processes: thinking, problem solving, social language, self-regulation, cognition, all of those things that come through these experiences. So I want you, even with an older toddler, to listen to this so you can reflect back and honestly analyze, what did we do? Maybe this is why my child was a little stuck or has plateaued. And how can I use some of these strategies to help support him now, not necessarily go back to babbling because I want to talk about the pros and cons of that, but I want you to understand sometimes it's really, really helpful to step back and look at what happened in those first 16, 18, 20 months to get where we are today, and then how can we close those gaps. And that's what I'm all about, closing those gaps before you really fall off the cliff and then struggle downstream. So the first step here is really a clarification, because a lot of people, healthcare providers and speech language pathologists, we kind of group cooing and babbling together. But there's a striking difference, and there are developmental markers that we have to respect and at least understand. So cooing is more in line with crying because both are what we refer to as natural reflexes. They're not necessarily intentional, especially in those first 3 months. They're much more reactive. And cooing, the truth is more accidental in the beginning. And then you and I, as the mom or the primary caretaker, begin to reinforce that because that's our first process of communication, right? So cooing is really your baby's first sound production, besides crying, that draws our attention. And it usually happens between 6 and 8 weeks of age. So those first 4 to 6 weeks are more or less building his or her tolerance of this outside world. And crying is their major form of communication. It's a reflex of saying either I'm happy and I'm not crying, or something's wrong and I need help. Whether I need love and attention, or I'm cold, or I'm hot, or I'm hungry, or I'm dirty, I don't know. And so I'm just going to cry. And they begin to hone even different crying patterns, and you begin to interpret them based on the environment, right? Maybe they're overtired or undertired and they really don't want to go to sleep, and so they start fussing. And then cooing often happens accidentally. And we, like I said, the primary love in their life, will reinforce those first sounds. Say sigh, or a guttural sound made in the back of the throat, perhaps when they're laying down and you're over them playing together. And because of gravity, right, there's a little saliva in the back of the throat, and then they start to wiggle or move, and then they're breathing at the same time, and a phonation, a sound comes out of their mouth. They don't do it on purpose, but you and I notice it and we reinforce it. And then that draws their attention. It also can happen easily when your baby is in tummy time, and hopefully you're face to face with them and engaging with them. And that pressure on the front of their body as they're trying to get in tune with their limbs and their torso and their neck, sounds will come fluttering out of their mouth by accident, and you will reinforce that. And then you probably also have experienced laughing, which again is a response, a pleasurable response, more or less like a reflex. But around 16 weeks of age, then your baby, his or her laughs will be much more responsive to things in their immediate world. Again, your facial expressions, your oohs and ahs, and even building that relationship. It takes a while. I mean, you have this immediate visceral love for each other, right? He's on survival mode, but he's also getting oxytocin, and you're getting oxytocin in those first several weeks. But if you're playing close up and show them a cute rattle, the sound, the colors of it, perhaps you blow softly on his face or use a silk scarf. I will often use a tissue and kind of blow it open across them, and they see this movement, this flutter, they feel the soft breeze or blow on their face. You can also make noises with your mouth and your lips, and it's all fascinating to them. And they're really honing their attention to you at the same time, learning how to respond, right? That this is pleasurable. It feels good. And so I'm developing a way to communicate back to you the best that I can. Now, based on those first 2 or 3 months, babbling is the milestone that kicks in after that cooing, the laughing, the crying gets a little more honed in. And I think it's overlooked, as I said, by most pediatricians. Certainly daycare providers don't understand. They know that it's a box that they need to check off in the development, but they don't know that there are 6 levels or 6 stages of babbling, and they don't know how to differentiate them or support them. They might, babble a little bit back here and there or coo, and then they drop the ball. Unfortunately, speech pathologists in their history form will have a little section. Did they babble? Was it a lot? Was it a little? What kind of babbling? But they very rarely dive deep. I know other therapists, and we talk about it, but we too can gloss over it. But for the last, I'd say 10 or 12 years, I've really dove deep into it because, as I said, I align it a lot with crawling. And that if that's a missing piece to the puzzle, that gives me insight to how well that foundation is solidified or is not. So as a basic rule of thumb, delayed babbling usually is considered absent consonant vowel production, right? And in a previous episode, I've talked about the syllable structures, and I'll refer to them a little bit in this episode. But if there's absent consonant vowel production by 7 months, the latest would be 8 months, then that's considered delayed babbling. So if you have an 8-month-old or a 9 or a 10-month-old, and they're really not babbling the way that I will lay it out here in this episode, then you want to get a jump on it. You want to say, okay, this is where we need to be. Let's enhance this developmental milestone. And the reason why it's a good, solid rule of thumb to hold by is because it can be an early sign of more serious issues. It doesn't have to be, right? I think it does and should warrant a discussion with your healthcare provider. And as I said, don't be surprised if your pediatrician kind of dismisses you or says, oh, don't worry, every child develops on their own pace, and every baby's different and unique. But we know through the last 100 years of study and thousands and millions, really, of babies and toddlers, we know what a good, healthy developmental process looks like. And if they zig or zag, take notice. And I think, unfortunately, pediatricians and speech pathologists really don't have much to contribute because they don't understand themselves. And so they can't really give you advice other than wait and see, or just love on your baby, or maybe you could read to them more. They haven't really peeled back the layers. I do think it's at least warranted to say, okay, if they're quiet at 7, 8, 9 months of age, let's rule some other things out. What's their eye contact like? What's his engagement? If he's quiet, is he still attending and engaging with me when I'm playing with those funny noises and those funny faces and I'm amping up my parentese? Is he engaged with me, right? Let's rule out any kind of hearing problem. Now, all babies in the United States, I think it started in 1999. My daughter was born in 2000, so she was one of the first group of babies born in the U.S. that got that hearing screening. But that doesn't mean that There are ear infections that can occlude hearing acuity. There are all kinds of other issues, wax problems. A lot of kids have wax issues. So we want to rule that out. Can he or does she respond to loud noises, right? If you're playing and a door gets slammed, or if you're feeding her and the doorbell rings, or your phone goes off, or you yell across the room, all of those immediate loud noises. How does he or she respond? Is it intermittent? Does he do it sometimes in some body postures, some environments and not others? Did he do it last week and not this week? These are really, really good questions to ask yourself. Also, you want, especially with a 7, 8, 9-month-old, you want to see, does he track you when you walk across the room? Is he connected with you? Even though their vision is pretty tight in those first several months, so 8 to 12 inches. Again, I think we're designed that way by our creator because you are it. You're his or her number one entity in this world. But I think if you have these questions, then it might warrant to pick up the phone and call a speech pathologist, at least ask for a consultation. Because as I said, most pediatricians might dismiss you. Give him more time, read more, blah, blah, blah. These simple things, not let's rule these things out. And if you're still unsure, then inquire with more than one source. You're going to get information here from me today, but you can continue to Google, Dr. Google, right? But you're going to get a variety of inputs. Call your best friend, call your sister, call another speech therapist, and figure out what's going on. And yes, some babies are quieter or less noisy, but all babies are driven to verbally communicate. And so they need to make some noise every single day. And I know that very few speech therapists or private practitioners would see a child younger than 1 unless they're a feeding expert, right? Or unless you have a big diagnosis like cerebral palsy or Down syndrome. But if you have an unremarkable pregnancy and delivery and full term, and when we say unremarkable, means that you didn't have any issues or trauma, right? That everything kind of went as planned, as smoothly as possible. But I think a good therapist who believes in preventative care and wanting to help moms help their baby stay on track would give you a good phone consultation. Meanwhile, you can take all of this information and build a plan around it. I think, and this is how my practice always went, that get a baseline. And that's what I used to tell parents all the time. It's not whether we want to do a full-fledged evaluation or not. It's simply, let's get a baseline, and then I'll give you some strategies, some do's and don'ts, right? How to build that healthy home environment. And then we'll follow up in 30 days or 60 days. To me, that's what is quote unquote best practice. To never, ever, ever dismiss your concern. In 60 days, your child could be that noisy Kathy and you wish that you never helped him find his voice, but you're on track. You know where he's going. I've even done monthly check-ins where the family has called me and we've done a Zoom or a FaceTime, especially during those lockdown years, which was a nightmare for everyone. But too many moms truly felt isolated, and that there's a lot of confusion and this sense of abandonment. It's like, holy cow. I bring this baby home and my support system is social distancing me. And so I think it's really important. I use that term a lot here, but this is my passion because I think we're doing a disservice to you, new mom, you, new dad, you, new grandparent, you guys. And it started a long, long time ago, and it's just gotten worse over the last, I'd say, 2 decades. Because I know that that whole connection makes a difference for you as the mother trying to figure out this new journey of hers, and your baby's health and well-being. And I've shared with you in the past that I always had a one-way mirror. I had several of them in California. All my therapists had one. But I would have families bring in their favorite toys, their favorite foods. I would create a natural setting as much as possible where there are no distractions. There's a limited field. I'd say, Mom, just take out 2 or 3 little toys to experience together. And it was also a great opportunity for me to demonstrate with Mom what it felt like to be present. And you might wonder, well, don't I do that at home all the time? No, because our home life is busy and active. And maybe you have older kids, or maybe you work from home, or maybe your husband works at home. And so there's a lot of stuff going on. And I would really like to set the stage and let moms feel 10 minutes, 20 minutes to really just be in it with their little one. And I would observe behind the one-way mirror and give feedback of how can you elicit more engagement? How can you also give some white space so your baby then could practice initiating? And all of those steps are important. And we'll talk about this in the ages and stages and some of the strategies. But that's all kind of the precursor, the setting the stage. And I just want to round this out with a fun fact that all babies from different cultures typically begin babbling around the same age. And that's usually around 5 to 6 months. That's when real babbling, and we'll define what that looks like. But the interesting part, or the fun fact, is that the sounds that they make sound different depending on the native language. So even in those first 4 to 6 months, they're coding that language. And we, as speech pathologists, know this, and that's why I always scratch my head and I'm thinking, well, why don't you help a mom who's asking for advice during this babbling stage? But my field really waits, like other fields, waits until there's a problem, right? Where there's no words at 24 months, or their speech is unintelligible at 3 years of age. But I think we have to always remind ourselves that your baby is listening. There's actually this great study, I think it was in the late 1990s, and it's been replicated a number of times. And when I really dove deep into the neuroscience, and that was probably in the mid 1990s when neuroplasticity kind of came into the light, right? That's where the home or the business computer and the internet all kind of exploded there in, I'd say, mid 1990s. But this study was, as I said, has been replicated, and the first one was between French and German parents. And what the researchers found was that the baby's cry had the same prosody or the melody that the parents used in their native language on the second day of life. So within 24, 36 hours, your baby is beginning to code the melody of your native language. And it was kind of easy to measure between German and French because they're very different sounding languages. And I always attributed it to the concept that babies, newborns, are citizens of the world, quote unquote, right? And it's not this world peace or kumbaya stuff. It really is about neuroscience and how we're built. We had these mechanisms that are built for survival. And the first one is I need to find my mother's voice because I've already coded it in utero. And now there's maybe a whole bunch of voices, maybe even, 2 or 3 different female voices, but I know where mama is. And I had that pre-coded. And then within those first 24, 36 hours, my cry is even going to match her melody. And that to me is fascinating. And I think it's important that we recognize that babies can decode any language. So if you need to switch up your language, if you're a multi-language family, that's totally cool. And we're wired to do that well. But the point here that I'm making is that they need us from the get-go, right? And it's really important that we don't let too much time, once we all kind of get settled into this new life of ours, and we're starting to physically recover from whatever your pregnancy and delivery was, really use the time, every time, feeding and changing and loving on your baby purposefully, intentionally, right? Intentional parenting. And how we do that is by setting this stage. And I've mentioned this, I think, in this episode, but I know I talk a lot about how we have this, or your baby has this 8 to 12 inch visual space, right? That's, if you think about when you held them for breastfeeding or even bottle feeding, that you are in each other's world, and that's it. Right? That's why he stares at us or she stares at you, because that's all they can see. They're looking at your facial movements, your eyes, your lips, your jaw, and trying to synchronize that with all the stuff that's coming out of your mouth, this noise making. And so the ears and the eyes are really working together, and all he or she sees in those first 3 months is your face. Everything beyond your face is pretty dang blurry. You're it. You're the center of the universe. You're also his means to survival. So that's why we're wired that way. Not only to start coding your native language, but this beautiful face in front of me will help me survive. So from the get-go, every single time you engage, they're putting more and more data together, right? That what they see, what they hear, what they feel, your sounds, your facial expressions, and the nonverbal, of course, right? The prosody, the rhythm, the pitch, the intonation, the pauses. So to lay or set the stage here, 1, sing to your baby. Tune in, because this helps build tuning into the rhythm of his language, your native language. 2, repeat the sounds that accidentally come out of him during those cooing phases or those first several months, because this teaches your baby about listening, right? And that, oh, wow, something, even if it came out of my mouth accidentally, it was important to this beautiful mother of mine because she said the same thing. So they're listening and they're matching. Ooh, that echoed. That's interesting. And that it also, after several weeks of this initial us imitating them, then they begin to make the same sound back. And that's the very first step in turn taking, or in what we are striving for, that conversational flow. And then the third big thing that a lot of us talk about is that sing-song or parentese voice, because that's building their attention. You're making it interesting. You're stretching out the sounds. They're starting to code their native language. Prune away any sounds that are irrelevant. Because by 8 months of age, they've pruned away 90% of what they don't need in their native language. And so even if you're talking and using 2 languages, you're a bilingual family, that's fine. They'll just prune out all the rest. But that builds their attention, that sing-song parentese. And it's really humanese because an older child will do it to a baby. And so we're, again, through this evolutionary process, we have learned ways that are part of our DNA to help build human communication. So that's laying the stage, right? We need to look at the difference between cooing and babbling. We set the stage by really being in it with them, recognizing that how they see your face and hear your voice, they're really building a network. They're zoning in on the rhythm of their native language, and you can do that through singing. And, you just sing the words. You don't even have to do nursery rhymes. But repeat any cooing. That's building that whole turn taking, and then the parent ease. Build their attention. So now let's look at the ages and stages of babbling. So most babies start babbling between 4 and 6 months of age. And remember, cooing is different. And I just kind of walked through that. But it's important, those first 3 to 4 months of cooing. I always think of home building because my husband and I did that together, leveling the ground, pulling up any rocks. You want it level. So when you put in the cement footers, it's stable. It's even. It's not going to shake or tilt when you build weight on top of it. So your baby in those first 3 to 4 months needs to start making noise. And then you'll see as babbling grows, then it gets longer and more complex. But there are very specific steps between 6 and 12 months of age. And then between 12, 13 months, and 18 months, it becomes a combination. And things really shift there too. And you'll see after their first birthday that babbling quality shifts, meaning that they begin to attach meaning to their babbles or their speech patterns that they're practicing. And so there's a shift in the quality of their vocal output. So as another rule of thumb, so one, we want babies to be babbling, making lots of noise by 7 or 8 months. And then we'll walk through those ages and stages. And then most of the jargon, most of the babbling is gone by 24 months of age. These are our rules of thumb that help us figure out where your child is on this journey. So I think a lot of us, including pediatricians and a lot of speech pathologists, might think that babbling is just that simple gaga, gaga, mama, mama. But it's like always here, it's much more nuanced. And my job is to shine the light on the nuances to help you figure out how to support your beautiful baby. And of course, each stage has its own developmental significance that we're going to walk through. So the first stage is pre-babbling sounds. And we talked about that, like through cooing, right? And different cryings. And that you need to measure as well, or track, or at least monitor, right? You don't have to necessarily write those down, but those first 3 or 4 months, they're going to be mostly vowels, like, oh, ah, ooh, right? And it's not babbling. Those are vowel-like sounds coming out of their mouth that we build a relationship with. It's an important part of this journey, and we need to separate that out. I want to share a sweet story that happened to me this summer. A family member, a mom, just had a baby in June, and I met up with them, and the little guy, Sammy, was about 6 or 7 weeks old. And whenever I meet a new mom, whether it's, a client or a family member, I totally respect this new relationship. I think it's sacred. And so I never ask to hold a baby, and I never want moms to feel uncomfortable or obligated that they have to let this woman, even if I'm a family member, hold the baby. But I'm always itching to engage with any baby or toddler. And I do it from a distance at the grocery store, but this is a family member, and I wanted to really meet this beautiful bundle of joy. Anyway, I suggested that mom place her little guy on the couch on perhaps tummy time. And I wanted her to be comfortable and to relax and feel confident that her baby can do this. But I also wanted to engage with this little guy, Sammy. And she knows what I've done. We've talked. I think she actually has a degree in child development. But, brand new mama. And I never, ever want moms to feel like I'm judging them or grading them, right? And I just wanted to geek out on this beautiful bundle of joy. And I knew that the pregnancy was healthy. I knew the delivery was healthy and all of this. But I sat on the floor. So Sammy was placed on his tummy on the sofa. I sat on the floor and we were face to face. And this is like my special. I don't have to touch the baby. I don't have to. But if I get in, 8, 10, 12 inches, then I can see how he engages, but I can also model for mom how we can pique his interest and help him learn to tolerate tummy time and build a cooing system, right? So he was interested. I was a new face. I was a new voice. I was a female voice. That kind of helped. But he really popped his head up and he really kind of moved and tried to get support on his forearms. And there was a lot of noises flooding out of his beautiful mouth. And yes, it was by accident. And yes, it surprised mom that I was engaging this because she shared later on that she noticed this before, but she thought that they were more complaints. And although I never said this to her, I thought she would put him perhaps on the couch or on the bed, but not necessarily, quote unquote, distract him by showing her beautiful face in front of him. And at the same time, building these tummy time opportunities, right? But he was distracted enough by this novel face and these noises coming out of me and my immediate responses to his sounds that accidentally came out. And it was really highly interactive and engaging, positive for all of us. And she was, I think, even though I never asked afterward, but she was really relieved to see, because we lasted 12, 15 minutes. I mean, a long while. And she was like, holy cow, he's never tolerated tummy time like that. Now, it was perfect, right? He had been fed, but I think, everything had settled in his tummy. And so he wasn't going to spit up anything. So he was alert and engaged. It was, mid-afternoon. And everybody felt like it was a great success. And I really think that she walked away there feeling like, all right, that makes good sense. And the noises were accidental, but I can reinforce them. We can build and at the same time help him get physically stronger and tolerate longer and longer periods. Now, with a 6, 7 week old, 10, 12 minutes on the tummy isn't necessarily something that you strive for each and every day, but you take the opportunity when you see it, right? And because of the pressure on his belly and his moving of his limbs, he's still wiring his system. He's still figuring out, I am kind of like attached. And every time I move, I kind of feel it. But he's also breathing naturally. And so, of course, phonation comes out of his mouth. It's those times where I really think that new moms have to build their courage to try new things, right? And if he doesn't like being on the floor, then put him on the sofa. If he is more engaged with you when he's on your lap, then do that. The whole idea is that these first several months during this pre-babble phase, it's really important to do a lot of trial and error. Because like I said, it's leveling out your land before you put in the cement footers to build the house. And the cooing is really important there. And so that pre-babble phase, I know I've talked a lot about that here, but many of these things are overlooked, are just dismissed as irrelevant, or everybody has their own style to it. When we know there are hundreds and hundreds of articles that support what not the protocol, but the hierarchy is. All right, so let's look at stage number 2, which is called marginal babbling. And this usually happens when they're closer to 5 months of age. Some kids will be 4, some kids will be 6, but 5 months is a good starting point. And lo and behold, that's also the time where we strongly encourage you new moms to introduce some solid foods. The whole theory behind baby-led weaning is not to replace bottle-fed or nursing, but to introduce tastes and textures and give them a lot more opportunity to practice oral motor movement and build intentional, purposeful, volitional movement. And this is also where they begin to experiment sound production on purpose. So those first 3 to 4 months was a lot of accidents. And we're reinforcing that. And now, closer to that 5th month, they're going to try things on purpose. It's that experimental. That's what they're doing with the foods, and that's what they're doing with the sounds. And you should start to hear more constant vowel connection. Cooing is more vowel. Babbling is more constant in vowel. So that's what they'll say, ba, So you have a consonant vowel, like in ba, B-A, and then you'll have a vowel consonant. And in episodes, I believe it was 68 and 69, I dive deep into these syllable structures that they need to build before they can have true words and before they can build phrases, 2-word phrases by their 2nd birthday. And so all of these building blocks go together. Think back to my build a house analogy or metaphor, I guess. But look back or listen to 68 and 69 where I talk about the critical prerequisites to the first word and how best to help your toddler move from syllables to words to phrases. So in that, keep in mind, vowels are produced by different shapes of our mouth. Predominantly, our jaw is going up and down, but we also have different shapes to our lips and then our tongue action. That's why we want them to start chewing both food and then appropriate chew toys around 4 months, 5 months, 6 months to build that jaw strength and what we call jaw heights, because vowels during cooing is made just by modifying your lips or your jaw or your tongue. So let's do something for fun, and we're going to say these 3 vowel sounds, but we're going to elongate them and then slowly move one mouth part. So we'll start with ooh. So your lips are round, like ooh la la, right? But it's ooh. And then we're going to just not move anything else, not our voicing, not our jaw. We're just going to slide our lips back into a smile. And we're going to move from ooh, Now, if you're just listening to this on audio, it might sound a little weird, but if you watch my mouth go from the ooh, the round circle lip movement, to a big smile, and we're still phonating, we change across two different vowel sounds, right? Now, if we just simply add opening up our jaw, now you're going to have 3 contrast vowels. Ooh, ah. Sort of like singing, right? That's what parentese is. That's when we sing nursery rhymes, all of these. But we're simply just moving the shape or the posture of our mouth, lips, and our jaw. We haven't even gotten our tongue yet. But if you realize that your baby needs a lot of oral motor playment, exercise, practice to get these vowels out. Consonants, on the other hand, are a whole different animal, and they require really fine motor movements. And that's why in the beginning, these stages from cooing, pre-babble to marginal babble, these building blocks are important. So let's just, for example, remember I talked about linguistic elements in the beginning of this episode, and I shared about phonemes. And so phonemes are these individual sounds. So we start with vowels in the cooing stage, and then they start with these early speech sounds, these early consonants that start with the lips, and then the tip of the tongue, and then the back of the tongue. So the lip sounds would be the P, like in puppy, and B, boy, M, mama, W, water, right? Those are often the first words. The tongue tip sounds would be T, like in top, D as in dada, N as in nana, and then L is a later developing sound, but it requires the tip of the tongue movement pattern. And then we can look at the back of the tongue, and that is the K, right? Like in kitty. That was my daughter's first word. Or the G, go. And then the NG, ng, which is typically at the end of our English word. But these are the initial sounds, and those are the initial words, because it's the easiest first step of oral motor planning and speech production. And so I share this with you because I want you to see the complexity at the same time, that how all of these things are embedded naturally through this remarkable biological masterpiece of how cooing and the stages of babbling are really, really helpful to get your child to his 2-word utterance at 2 and full-fledged conversation at 3. And just a side note, you know me, I like side notes. These nuances fit together. And I've shared this before, but I worked with older kids and helping them break the code to literacy, because reading and writing is a man-made skill. I always equate it with learning how to ride a bike or learning how to swim or drive a car. Somebody has to teach you. It's superimposed on this cooing and babbling and first words and first syllable phrases and sentences. Because in our English language, we have 26 letters in the alphabet. Those are just the letters that will help us translate the spoken word into written word. In English, we have about 44 different sounds. And I say about, or we say about, because we have to consider accents. So the funny R in New York and Brooklyn is different than the R in California. So we have to respect those differences. But there's about 44 different sounds. And you're like, okay, but we have 26 letters. How does that all work out? And here's the example I always give. We have from the alphabet the letter T that says T, right? Like in top. And then we also have the letter H, like in hot, right? But we also have, when we put those 2 letters together, they make 2 more different sounds. And that's the TH. And so we have what we call a voiced and a voiceless TH. So the voiced would be th. We put the tip of the tongue between, we call it interdental, between our two teeth, or our top and our bottom teeth, and we turn on our voice, like in the word that. And then we can turn off our voice, make our mouth do the same thing. The tip of the tongue is placed interdentally, and we turn off the voice and we say th, like in the word thin. Th, right? It's quiet. We call it quiet or voiceless. So that's how we come up with those 44 sounds using 26 letters in the alphabet. But also, of those 44 sounds, 20 are vowels. Again, we only have 5 vowels in the alphabet, but we have created, through human evolution, 20 vowel sounds that are mostly made by different jaw heights, and then we move our tongue up and down inside our mouth and we manipulate our lips. That's why as your baby moves from bottle or breastfeeding, and there are different movement patterns for sucking from your breast versus sucking from a factory-made nipple, those have its pros and cons. But as they move into solid foods, we really want that strength and stability and what we call gradation for the jaw. And then if we have a stable jaw that they can hold still, think of that, and then they can move their lips, and then they can hold their lips in place and move their tongue separately. And so we call that disassociation. It's sort of like having a stable core to your body, and we can move our arms. Think of a ballerina. That's the best metaphor, where, he or she dances and they have an incredible, stable and strong core, and they can do these remarkable things with their limbs, right? And that's what happens inside our mouth. Again, we need a lot of oral motor practice. And the two things that we do with our mouth is eat and talk. So in a nutshell, one of the reasons why I fell in love with this field was because I thought it was a freaking miracle that any human being really learned how to talk. And when I really started to dive deep into the phonology, right, the speech sounds and the oral motor planning and sequencing, how we manipulate these 100 muscles, 26 just in our mouth, to produce connected speech. And again, that brings me back to God had a beautiful design with true intention. That's how I look at it. But this second stage is called marginal because they're just beginning to put consonants and vowels together. Cooing was just vowels. And now between 4 and 5 months, they need a lot of vocal play. You need to help them play and learn how to make a lot of noise. It's consonants and vowels now, but they're also doing a lot of blowing, making raspberry sounds, grunting, squealing, whining, and a lot of crying, right? But all of these vocal communication aspects really help them get in tune, not only with the motor planning, but their auditory listening. And we're going to talk a little bit about this. But the bottom line, babies need to be noisy. And I always say that here, they need to be noisy and messy, right? That's just your world for the next 5-6 years. But every year, as they hone their skills, they get better and better. A little less noisy, a little less messy. But keep in mind, Mom, that you are the instigator. You're the driving force and the true influencer. The first influencer, I think, long before the social media came to be. Okay, so as I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, this topic, cooing, babbling, first words, really requires a thorough discussion. It's so often overlooked or dismissed as this minor check on a history form. And as you can clearly see, it is so much more. And really, so many moms, so many families miss critical time in that first year. So make sure that you get the essential checklist, the outline down below. I have a link where it lays out all 6 stages of babbling and some key points for both part 1 and part 2. And keep in mind that you can email me anytime with specific questions. I love to get your emails. We'll continue this conversation next Tuesday. And meanwhile, remember, eat, talk, play with intentionality every single day. God bless. And don't forget to get your free checklist guide on babbling. All right, take care. Bye.